I'm going to start in a very personal way, try to explain to all of you what Israel and Zionism means to me. I know there are students of mine watching, so they may have heard this before, but that's okay. It's worth repeating. I've had the privilege of being in and out of Israel over 50 something times, probably close to 60. If you add up all the times I've been in the country, in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the first decade of the 2000s, and the second decade, I've probably been in Israel a little bit more than 5.5 years. Most of the time I've been there has been very intense in a good way. I learned in yeshiva there for a year. I've spent time in the military and in paramilitary units, whether it's the police, border patrol, or other organizations that are involved in security work. I've led 19 tours to Israel. I used to have my own tour in Israel called Camp Moledet. Each one of those was 6 weeks. I worked with Right On for Israel, so I took about 12 groups to Israel then. I've been very privileged. I've been all the way from the top of the Hermon, which is the northern tip of the state of Israel. I've been all the way to the tip, where there is a military observation post there. And I've been all the way down, all the way to the tip of Eilat on the border with Egypt and everything in between. I've been all the way on the west side, all the way to the ocean, and I've been all the way to the Jordan River and everything in between. If I was to take one album of all the pictures that I've been privileged to take or have been taken of me and the places I've been and put them in one album, and then I would add to that one album what they call coffee table book pictures. Coffee table book pictures are the pictures that are taken by hand gliders, helicopters, Piper Cubs that fly about 1,000 or 2,000 feet above Israel and take some of the most remarkable, gorgeous pictures of the country, north to south, east to west. If I was to take some of those best pictures, put them all together with my greatest hits album, I would then want to use a metaphor from science fiction. I would want to travel back in time. I'm telling you all of this to explain what I think, what I feel, what I believe, literally every single day of my adult life. I would take my album with me with all these great pictures, and including the ones I didn't take from the air, and I would dial my time machine to take me back to some of the most horrible times in Jewish history. I would want to go back to the Crusades, which were in the 1090s. I would want to go to Spain in 1492 in the summer, when the Jews were exiled, kicked out of Spain. I'd want to go to the 1880s, 1890s, to what is today Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and that entire area, where there were thousands of pogroms that went on for over 2 decades. And then my final destination would be the worst destination, would be Eastern Europe and parts of Western Europe during the Holocaust. That's 1939 till liberation in May of 1945. And I would stop in all of these places where Jews are having an absolutely horrific time in their lives, seeing killing, destruction, burning, mass killing, trying to stamp out and annihilate Judaism and Jews. And I would tell all these people, I am from your future. I'm from your future. I come from the 21st century. The Jewish year is 5781. The secular year is 2020. And I am letting you know that we have a sovereign Jewish state called the State of Israel. It was reestablished in 1948. So as I come to speak to you, they're 72.5 years old. And I have a book of pictures from this state. And I will show them pictures of the Galil, and from the coastal plain, and from the Golan, and from Samaria, and from Judea, and from Jerusalem, and from the Negev, and from Eilat. I would show them pictures of people, of Jews that come from about 150 countries, Jews who are white as snow, and Jews who are as black as coal. Jews who come from every country you can imagine. Kurdish Jews, Ethiopian Jews, Jews from Northern India, Jews from every country in Europe, Jews from every country in Latin America, and tell them that we've seen the beginning of the return of the exiles, the ingathering of the exiles. I'd show them the pictures. I'd show them the pictures of the Kotel and what it looks like when the Kohanim, when the priests bless people, in particular on Sukkot, on Chol HaMoed. This year it was less, much less because of Corona. Normally it's about 150 to 200,000 people show up. I would show them pictures of the Knesset. I would show them pictures of Tel Aviv and Haifa and Rishon LeZion and Petach Tikva and Kibbutzim and Yeshuvim, hospitals, schools, yeshivot, Bate Knesset, of swearing in ceremonies of the IDF. And I would tell them, this is where I come from. And in this country, there are 9.2 million people, citizens. 7 million of them are Jews. 2.2 million are non-Jewish Israelis who are citizens of this country. And I would show them the flag of the country, the blue and white, which was modeled after the Talit, with the Magen David in the middle. And I would show them the emblem of the state, which is the menorah that stood in the second Beit HaMikdash. They got the imprint for it from the Arch of Titus, which stands in Rome, and I've had the privilege to stand underneath. And I would tell these people, this is what is going to be in the future. I guarantee you, at each one of these stops, these people would be weeping with joy, unbearable joy, because compared to their reality, I am living their dream. What they say in their prayers, what they've learned in Tanakh, what they have learned from their teachers and Rabbanim, I get to experience. And they would probably ask me, can I describe what the Mashiach looks like? And I would say, I'm waiting for him as well. Because in their minds, I must be living in the days of the Mashiach. I think of this on a daily basis. Every time I open up a Siddur, every time I daven Shemona Esrei, it's 3 times a day. And we talk about Kaptzeinu, and we talk about returning to Yerushalayim, and we talk about V'techazeni Einenu B'Shuvcha L'Tzion. I am living the dream of over 100 Jewish generations. And that makes me feel special and privileged and obligated every single day of my life. I am living the dream that for 2,000 years Jews were dreaming. I'm in that dream right now, as are many, many of my friends. I would say they're not all close friends, but hundreds of my friends and thousands of people that I know, and probably millions of Israelis kind of feel something similar to what I'm feeling. And I would say hundreds of thousands of people in the diaspora feel that way. What is the Jewish people's relationship to the land of Israel? Well, the way to understand that is to define Judaism. Now, the interesting thing is our enemies, those who hate Zionism and those who are against the Jewish right to the land of Israel, are very well aware the definition of who the Jews are and what Judaism is sits at the heart of whether we believe we have an absolute right to be there and those who believe we don't. I'm going to be reading, it's actually in my book, an article from the PLO Covenant. The PLO is the Palestine Liberation Organization, a terrorist organization that was founded in Egypt in 1964. And they wrote this as their first preamble, but the official one was written in 1968. Today, the PLO is known as the Palestinian Authority. Thanks to Israel, it's actually been turned into a political entity. This article still sits in the PLO covenant and has never been changed. Ready? The Balfour Declaration, the Mandate of Palestine, and everything that has been based upon them are deemed null and void. Claims of historical or religious ties of Jews with Palestine are incompatible with the facts of history and the true conception of what constitutes statehood. Judaism, being a religion, is not an independent nationality, nor do Jews constitute a single nation with an identity of its own. They are citizens of the states to which they belong. Why would Yasser Arafat and his merry band of terrorists in the late 1960s sit down and go out of their way to act as if they're the Encyclopedia Britannica and give us information about the Jewish people, the Jewish nation, and redefine things? Because they know very, very well. Number one, that if our ties are real and all you have to do is study history and study archaeology, we have been there for well over 3,000 years. There are dozens upon dozens of archaeological sites in Israel. They hate these archaeological sites. To this day, there are leaders in the Palestinian Authority and Hamas that talk about the phony temple in Jerusalem. There was no such thing. There was no Mitzada. There was no Chatzor. There was no Gamla. None of this happened. So they start, first of all, by erasing our factual connection to the land, historically, that is undeniable. And then they redefine Judaism. And they tell us, you are a religion. You pray, you eat your kosher food, you need your synagogues, and you are citizens of America, Poland, Lithuania, Argentina, Mexico, wherever it may be, but you do not constitute a nation. Why is the PLO interested in telling you this? Because they want to undermine this belief that there is such a thing as a Jewish nation, and therefore your right or our right to a state. So if you want to understand what the conflict is about, or to a certain extent was, because that's beginning to change, which I'll perhaps get to later in questions and answers. But at the heart of this conflict, whether you remember the PA, Hamas, a left-wing professor teaching Middle Eastern studies in a university in the United States of America, or a mufti giving a speech in a mosque in Gaza, or a member of the Muslim Brotherhood in Qatar or in Turkey, you all agree on this. There is no such thing as a Jewish nation. Because if we're a nation, then we have a right to a state. Nations have the right to their own state. That's what this conflict is all about. And that's one of the few things that people on the extreme left, jihadists, and people like that can agree on. So the question is, what does it mean to be a nation? Now I'm pausing, and I'll repeat this at the end. Almost everything that I'm saying is stuff you have, I don't care how excited, hopefully you are, how interested you are, you need to read about this. You need to read and understand, know the history, the documents, the maps. This is not just a one-shot deal. Can't teach you this in 40 minutes. This is hopefully to excite you. This is hopefully to engage you. This is hopefully to get you more interested in finding out about who we are, what we are, etc. So the way to find out what a nation is and how the Jewish people are a nation is by doing two things. One is, let's see what Judaism says to us. Unlike Article 20, with all due respect to the scholars who wrote the Palestinian Liberation Organization Covenant, I think I can define myself, thank you. And the way to define myself is to look at my sources. And my sources are the Bible, the Mishnah, and the Talmud, starting with the Chumash, 5 books of Moses, then the rest of the Bible, then the Mishnah, and then the Talmud. Those are my sources. And this is not relevant whether you're Jewish or not Jewish or an atheist. I'm allowed to say, be intellectually honest and understand these are my sources. I'm not asking you to believe that they're divine. I feel that they are divine. You can believe whatever you want, that they're historical documents. I studied Islam in college. I studied the Quran. I studied about Muhammad. I'm not a Muslim, but I do understand that if you want to understand what the Muslims believe, you have to study their books. I don't believe that the Quran was given to Muhammad by the angel Gabriel. I don't believe that. But I do believe it's about 14 centuries old. And I do believe that 1.4 to 1.5 billion Muslims believe every word that is written in there. And they define themselves based on every surah, every chapter in the Quran. And I would be a fool to think otherwise. So the reality is, the Judaism that the Torah talks about is interconnected with Israel. The whole last book of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the 5th one, Devarim, where Moses basically speaks to the Jewish nation for 5.5 weeks, and about a third of the 613 commandments are in that book, are all about preparing them for the running of a sovereign Jewish state in the land of Israel. Now, the last part, which is not part of the 3 levels, is the Torah giving out boundaries. This is where the land of Israel will be. You can't set up this Jewish republic wherever you want. Can't set it up in Lithuania or Ukraine or Montana or anywhere, only one place. And it talks about Nahar Prat, which is the Euphrates, down to there's a question, what is Nachal Mitzrayim? Is that the delta? Was that a large body of water that used to flow in the middle of Sinai? From Mayam Agadol, which is the Mediterranean, to the Mevoah Rava, which are the mountains of Jordan, or more specifically, in Sefer Bamidbar, in the last, I think that's called Numbers in English, in the 34th chapter, in Parshat Masa'eh, there are 12 verses, 12 psukim, that give you a clockwise definition of the boundaries of the land of Israel. It starts from the bottom of the Dead Sea, goes clockwise, brings you back to the top. This mountain, this valley, this body of water, it's very clear. This is where your state shall be. So by definition, Judaism and the running of a land are linked together. Without going into all the history, and this is why I said before, I want to get you interested, and you have to learn it. There was a sovereign Jewish state. The first sovereign Jewish state in Israel lasted 687 years, close to 7 centuries. Then we had close to 5 centuries of semi-independence during the Second Temple, and 102 years of full independence under the Maccabees. So in total, we had about 8 centuries of full independence, 5 centuries of semi-independence, and 19 centuries of being the majority of the population. Now the question of nationhood. What is a nation? The best definition I ever learned was when I was in college. I had a distinguished professor. His name was Bela Kirai. Bela Kirai was the chief of staff of the Hungarian army in the 1956 revolution against the Soviet Union. As you all know, or you don't know, Hungary lost. He was found guilty of treason by the Russians. They were going to hang him. The CIA got him out, brought him to the United States, and he then became a professor of history at Brooklyn College. He taught military history, Western history. He was a remarkable man. I took 3 of his courses. He taught us, this has nothing to do with Judaism or Zionism, he taught us that a nation has 3 components: common language, common culture, and a common land of origin. Those 3 things are the bedrocks that make up a nation. Now, it's interesting that many of the countries or the peoples that point their finger at us and say, you're not a nation, they wouldn't stand up to this particular litmus test, ironically. Let's start with common language. The Jewish people have their own language, Hebrew. Hebrew has been the spoken language of the Jews for 4 millennia. The alphabet that we have today is the modern alphabet. Go to the Israel Museum in Jerusalem and go to the division, the pavilion that talks about the development of modern Hebrew, the Hebrew language. The alphabet that we have today is about 22 centuries old. That's the modern alphabet. Any Jew who knows how to read Hebrew can go to the Dead Sea Scrolls, those on display in the Israel Museum, and can read them. It's the same Hebrew lettering that we use today. Hebrew has been the lingua franca of the Jewish people in the first temple and the second temple, and the remarkable thing in diaspora. Every book we've written in the diaspora that has religious connotations, except for the Talmud, which is Hebrew and Aramaic, everything else is in Hebrew. The prayer book, the Siddur, is in Hebrew. Mishnah in Hebrew. Shulchan Aruch, Hebrew. The Rambam, Hebrew. All the responsa between the rabbis throughout the world, Hebrew. The language has never been dead. It just wasn't spoken every day, but people who learned and people who prayed, which is the majority of the Jews, till about the emancipation of the Jews in Western Europe 2 centuries ago, Hebrew, pretty much every Jewish boy and girl knew Hebrew. Approximately 130 years ago, we revived this language that was the language of prayer and study into once again being a spoken language. But that language also has its own alphabet. So yes, we have a common language. And you can go find ancient coins and pieces in Israel museums that have Hebrew on it. Ancient Hebrew and modern Hebrew, which is 2,200 years old. Common culture. Since I redefined Judaism, Judaism gives us our holidays, our food, our dress, our calendar, our prayers. It changes everything. It gives us an entire Jewish culture. If we have our own calendar and our own holidays and our own diet and our own language on top of that, we live in our own culture. For example, 300 years ago, a Jewish businessman from Poland that had to have a business trip to Morocco, 2 different parts of the planet. That Jew from Poland was able to go to Morocco and meet about business, talk in Hebrew with slightly different accents, talk about that week's parsha, what they'll be reading in the synagogue. They could spend Sabbath together. He could eat in that person's home, and they could get along because they really share a great deal of culture. Common land of origin. The Jewish people, 3,300-year history. Archaeology backs it up. History backs it up. Maps back it up. Again, these are the things in my book. We have a relationship with that land that is something remarkable. Give you an example of how connected we are. When the Romans defeated the Jews after the big revolt against Rome, they minted a coin called Judea Capita. Judea is no more. Judea is no more. It was a picture of a Jewish girl, a slave in chains, with a Roman legionnaire behind her. They minted that coin in Caesarea, in Caesarea. In 1949, at the end of the War of Independence, a miraculous war, a Maccabee-style war, when the state of Israel was reestablished and won its war, the country was in shambles, the government had no money. They went back to Caesarea and they minted a victory coin. It has that same Jewish girl standing up, and behind her are young Israeli soldiers. The Roman Empire was gone. Judea Capita coins were in museums, but in our minds, we had to rectify the situation. The job wasn't done till we minted that coin, Yehuda Meshuchreret. Judea has been liberated. I want to just deal quickly with the question, where does the term Palestine come from? When the Romans defeated Judea in 70 CE, they thought they had finished with us. And 62 years later, there was another rebellion against Rome. And by the way, the rebellions are not just a Jewish perspective. Read what the Roman historians wrote about it. These were some of the biggest rebellions against Rome. That's why they built the Arch of Titus in Rome. They didn't build arches for everybody they defeated. There'd be nowhere to walk in Rome today. They defeated everybody. There was a rebellion led by Bar Kokhba, also called Bar Kosiba. When that rebellion was over, the Romans couldn't believe that in a 65-year period, they had to battle this one nation twice and bring in legions from Africa, Asia Minor, and Europe. So they felt one of the things they could do to really annihilate the Jews, which they did physically, was to destroy their historical connection to the land. The Romans knew the Bible, and they knew the hated enemies of the Jews in biblical times were the Philistines. The Philistines lived near the coast, on the coast. The Philistines, by the way, go to the Museum of Bible Lands in Jerusalem, which is near the Israel Museum, are a people from the Aegean Sea, Cyprus, Crete, Rhodes, Greece. They are not a Semitic people. They were destroyed pretty much in the 7th century BCE by the Assyrians. The Romans felt that the greatest poke in the eye to the Jews was to change the name from Judea in all history books, and remember, the winner gets to write history, to Philistina, the Latin way of saying Pilishtim. 5 centuries later, when the Arab generals who were conquering half of the planet got to this place and they asked each other where they were, they saw the name was Philistina, they Arabized it to Philistine. And then that was translated to English to Palestine. It has never been the name of a sovereign entity. It is the name of a region that the Romans gave. After they gave that name, that area was ruled by the Romans, the Byzantines, the Persians, the Arabs, the Seljuks, the Crusaders, the Mamluks, the Ottomans, and the British. At no point was there a sovereign state there. It was only in 1948 that the same people who had the last sovereign state there, the Jews, reestablished it. That Judaism operates on 3 levels. And I view those 3 levels as 3 concentric circles. Each circle taking up more and more space. The first circle is when Judaism does talk about religion. And if you'll open up a dictionary, you'll find out that religion has to do with the worshiping of a god, or gods, how one prays to his god/gods, the holidays and rituals and ceremonies you have towards your gods. That's what religion means as a definition. The religion of Judaism you'll find in level 1. Judaism talks about the temple, talks about sacrifices. It talks about our holidays. It talks about the special going up to the temple 3 times a year. It talks about Rosh Hashanah. It talks about Yom Kippur, talks about Sukkot, talks about Pesach, talks about Shavuot, talks about all the major holidays, talks about Shabbat, the Sabbath. It talks about how to build a temple, how to slaughter the animals and sacrifice them. It talks about who should work in the temple, who the Kohanim are, the priests, who the Levites are, what each one's job is, what each one of the items in the temple should look like, how it should be built, how it should be put together. It's replete with detail. The Jewish religion portion is replete with so much information that has to do how we worship the Almighty, what should we worship, when we should worship the Almighty, what our holidays are, what our ceremonies are, what our rituals are. It's all in there. What our temple should look like, who the people in the temple should be like, how they operate, how we, those of us, I'm not a Kohen, I'm not a Levite, how I interact with them when they do make my 3 trips a year to be in Jerusalem in the temple. So that first level is plenty of religion. The second level of Judaism is when Judaism begins to talk about things that are not connected directly with religious practice. I'm not a rabbi, I'm not a priest, I'm not a Levite, I don't work in the temple. It's not a holiday, it's not a Sabbath, it's not a life cycle event. It's just Yotav on a Tuesday afternoon. And normally that's not involved with religion. But you look on the second level, it begins to get into my personal dress, my personal diet, the personal way I should treat my body, personal laws about how I should act with family members and in business that has nothing to do with, quote, the worshiping of my God. There are very specific laws about what I can have on my body. For example, Jews are not allowed to have tattoos, and it's called ka'akaot in the Torah. I can't have ka'akaot. That means, I guess, even if I was an amazing superstar athlete and 40 years younger, I still couldn't play in the NBA or the NFL because I don't have tattoos. We can't have tattoos. We're supposed to have hair, men, on the side over here. That's pe'ot. We look differently. Where there was a whole issue of sniut, of modesty, of how we dress. There are certain laws that we have. Now, kosher is not religious food. Eating matzah is religious food. Drinking wine on Shabbat is religious food because that's connected to a particular Jewish holiday. Kosher is 24/7 times 365 for your entire life. It's your diet. It's your Jenny Craig on steroids. This is your diet, period, forever. So on the second level, we see Judaism leaving merely religion. This is how you dress. This is how you treat your body. This is how you deal in business. This is what you eat. It's not just religious. It begins to get very involved in your personal life, eating, lifestyle, body, etc. The third level, which is the largest concentric circle, blows everything away. On the third level, these are the areas of law that the Torah talks about: criminal law, military law, political law, social welfare law, taxation, family law, and yes, all the way at the end, religious law. The Torah talks about a judicial system called Sanhedrin that runs the life of the Jews in their promised land. It deals with all the laws that I talked about. There's not secular law and Jewish law. There's just Jewish law that deals with criminals, business, social welfare, taxation, military. All of that is covered in Jewish law. So when you go through that third level, we're not talking merely about religion or merely about an individual outside of my religious practices. We are now talking about a blueprint or a constitution for the running of a state. I want to repeat what those areas of law are from the Torah: criminal, military, political, property, which is land and transferable items, social welfare, taxation, family, and yes, religious law. When you add that all up together, what you get is, in my opinion, Judaism is a way of life based on the teachings of the Torah that connect both to the individual and to the running of a Jewish state for the Jewish nation. Judaism, by definition, mandates that there be a sovereign state for the Jews because they need to have a government, a military, a court system, a taxation system, a welfare system, all the things, all the trappings of statehood. And this is spoken about over and over in the Jewish Bible, in the Tanakh, in the Torah, and in the Tanakh, and then it's spoken about in more detail in the Mishnah and in the Gemara. Not only have we been successful, I just want to tell you a few things about modern Israel today. It's not just that we returned. Israel is in the top of the first world. Israel in 1948 was a third world country with 600,000 Jewish citizens and 160,000 non-Jewish citizens. Today, 7 million Jewish citizens, 2.2 million non-Jewish citizens. Israel today, on the happiness scale, of which place are people happiest, Israel rates number 11 or 10. It's the Nordic countries that tend to be on top. America's number 15, and most of the second and third world are all the way on the bottom. With everything Israel has to go through, Israel is considered either the 7th or 8th most powerful nation on earth. When you factor in technology, economy, science, medicine, military, resources, diplomatic ties. These are simply remarkable things because we are highly motivated and we believe in what we're doing. And I'm going to end with this and I'll take questions. The Zionist movement, the ancient one that motivated Yoshua bin Nun, who built the first Jewish state, Ezra and Nehemiah, who built the second Jewish state, the Maccabees, who turned it into a sovereign Jewish state, and the generation that came back in the 1880s and those who built the state and fought for it in 1948, and the young men and women in the army right now have one thing in common. They view themselves as players on the field. They are writing the next pages of Jewish history. That's our secret. Our secret is the Almighty, and our secret is our motivation, our remarkable connection to our people, to our land, to our Torah, to our history. And with that, I'll end. There are two types of evangelical Christians, and I'll answer how I deal with both of them. There is a growing group of evangelicals that have given up on this idea that Jews have to be converted to Christianity. They are a growing group in the evangelical world. They believe that there have been two covenants, the covenants with the Jews and the covenant with the Christians. Even Pope John Paul II spoke about this as well, when he tried to eradicate old Christian anti-Semitism, which is not a simple thing. Those evangelicals do not want to convert us. They truly believe that what Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, and Yechezkel, and what it says in Devarim about our return is something that is meant for us. For those group of evangelicals that do believe, and I think right now they're in a minority, that they support us because we should be in one place when Jesus comes back a second time so he can convert us, I'll take my chances with them. Okay? You help me now. When Jesus comes a second time, we'll talk then if that happens. So I believe most evangelicals are sincere. And for those who aren't, I am, as a Orthodox Jew, I'm not terribly frightened about the second coming. Now, one or two more points I want to make that I think are important to understand. Why has the Zionist movement been, the modern Zionist movement, been so successful? The most Zionist book written besides the Bible is the Siddur, the prayer book. That was written about 1900 years ago, 2000 years ago. That book is replete with, we want to return back to Zion. We want to go back to our homeland. Every synagogue faces Jerusalem. If you're an Egyptian, you face north. If you're an Iranian, you faced west. If you were a Syrian Jew, you faced south. If you were a European Jew, an Italian Jew, you faced east. Israel was the center of our lives, and Jerusalem was the center. All our prayers had to do with returning, building the temple, returning to Jerusalem. It's an exceptionally Zionist book. We weren't able to act upon it because of historical realities. But in the last 2 centuries, things have changed. So why has this movement been so successful? Number one, because it's not new. It tapped into something that for 2,000 years we were praying and hoping to happen. And people made aliyah throughout history, just never in large numbers. My family on my father's side are Hasidim. They made aliyah in 1807, 80 years, 75 years before the first aliyah. Why? Because the Stoliner Rebbe and Rabbaran Agodol in 1807 go back to the Holy Land. And if about 50 or 100 people did that. The reason the modern movement was successful, A, is because we're not new. We're ancient. We're ancient. We're an ancient people working with an ancient idea simply in the modern period. And the enthusiasm that I have, I hope I'm coming across that way, is the enthusiasm that the young Jews had in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, 10s, 20s, 30s, and 40s. Everybody was fired up with this imagination of the return back to Zion, with the flag, the blue and white. Magen David wasn't, by the Talit, wasn't picked by accident. With the menorah, it fired people's imagination. Polish Jews, Lithuanian Jews, Yemenite Jews, Algerian Jews, Jews all over the world, motivated by this biblical, religious, historical opportunity to return back to the land of Israel. And we've been successful. I'm relating this story not to aggrandize myself, but it's about, I represent hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in Israel who would do the exact same thing as me, as I did in this story, because we are confident in what we believe in. We are confident in our people, in our nation, in our God, and who we are and what we are. So here's the story. It was 1977, I believe, and the PLO, which in those days was the Hamas of today, they were hijacking planes. They were going into Israeli buses and slaughtering people. They were blowing up markets in Israel. They were attacking kindergartens. They killed a whole bunch of kids. Jack remembers in high school in Ma'alot in 1974. They were the world's biggest and most dangerous terrorist group. And when I went to Brooklyn College in the late 70s, early 80s, it was probably 60% Jewish. And it was a school full of lots of scholars who were teaching and lots of smart kids. It would be the equivalent of ISIS coming to a college campus, not Ami Horowitz, but real ISIS showing up on the campus and saying, what are you going to do about it? So the PLO showed up, set up a table in the middle of the quad. Now, I want to remind the audience, I was taking Arabic classes at the time and Islam classes. So I knew a lot of these guys from class. A lot of third world students, a lot of, angry people at the United States who bought in that Israel's colonialist and imperialist and America's the same thing. They put up the Palestinian flag and they had all these flyers, down with Israel, down with colonialism. I had just been back from a year in Israel. I also had done some security work. I was wearing my little bomber jacket from the Israeli army. I had my little knitted yarmulke. Every Jew was hiding and running away. I walked right into the crowd. I walked right into the crowd as if I was interested in reading their literature. And everybody's looking at me as if I'm mentally ill, which I may have been. And I started to pick up every booklet. Zionism, the colonialism and imperialist movement. Yeah, I like that one. That's a good one. Let me pick this one up. Israel, occupied Palestine. Yep, I've heard that one before. I'll take that. And I went and I picked up every piece of literature they have. The Zionist demon, the Zionist liars, the Zionist cancer, the imperialists, the colonialists. I picked up all the literature. And and people are looking at me like this guy is really Looney Tunes. Either he's one of us. I don't know why he's dressed like that. But if he's dressed like that and he's not one of us, what's he doing? So I collect all this stuff and I walk over to the table where the people running the demonstration are sitting. Now, one of them was a guy from my Arabic class. I knew him. I'm not buddies, but I knew him. His name was Ali. And I go, Ali, do you believe all this stuff here? Zionism, imperialism, Zionism, colonialism, Israel is really occupied. Of course I do. Of course, it's clear. There's nothing to discuss. I go, okay. I said, I want to tell you something. I want to give you a piece of advice. When I said I want to give you advice, everybody came closer. All the people who were with him wanted to hear my advice. So I go, listen, I got to give you credit. You've had a very good day at Brooklyn College. You have made the Jewish kids on this campus insane. They don't know what to do with themselves. Their heads are exploding. Some have anxiety attacks. Some are nauseous. Some may be vomiting. Some are calling their parents. They don't know what to do. What is this happening? Is there going to be a terrorist attack? You've done a great job here. You have kicked off, frightened, scared thousands of Jewish kids at Brooklyn College. I go, I don't know if that was your intent, but you succeeded. But the truth is, if I read your literature, that's not your final goal. Your final goal is for the occupied Palestine to be liberated. He looks at me like, holy crap, like, what is with this guy? I go, so let me give you advice how to liberate Palestine. I said, stop sitting here in Brooklyn College. Go to Beirut. Fly to Beirut. I said, I don't know exactly the address, but I know it's in West Beirut. Ask people for the headquarters of the PLO. That's where the PLO headquarters were in the 70s. Yasser Arafat's there. A lot of Abu Shihad was there. A lot of nasty people were there. I said, you need to find the PLO headquarters in West Beirut, and you need to tell them how committed you are to liberating Palestine. And what they'll do is they'll bring you to South Lebanon, where they have training camps. I think I said it'll take somewhere between 8 and 12 weeks, and they could train you to be what they say in Arabic is a fadayin. Fadayin is a freedom fighter. For us, it means terrorist. They'll teach you how to use AK-47s and grenades and how to cut wires and how to sneak in and how to get by patrols and how to blow up a building and how to shoot up a bus. They'll teach you the beginning, the vanguard. And I said, after you're done with all that training, you and a bunch of other fadayin will start making your way to the occupied Palestine border. And here's where I want to give you what I think is a piece of advice may help you and your friends. You see, what's waiting for you on the other side of the boundary is not the literature, it's not the caricatures that you made up about me and my friends. We're not colonialists. We're not imperialists. We're not sitting on somebody else's land. I'm not the English in Kenya. I'm not the French in Morocco. I'm not the Italians in Libya. This is my homeland. Now, we've always wanted to work something out with you if you want to talk, but that hasn't been where you people have been so far. When you get to that border, you're going to meet my friends. And my friends don't see themselves as anything other than the sons of Israel, proud Jews, and some may not be Jews, defending their country, their mothers, their fathers, their brothers, their sisters, and if they're older, their wives and their children. And they're going to do everything they can to help you die for your cause. And you think about that for a minute, and you have a nice day, Ali. Everybody came around me, and I started this whole, they wanted to have a whole conversation with me, and I very clearly, politely began to explain, this is where I'm coming from. I understand where you're coming from. I don't pretend that you're make-believe. Don't pretend that I'm make-believe. The cartoon character that you think I am, I'm not, because if I was, you would have beaten me 100 years ago. You have this all mixed up. You have no idea who you're dealing with. By the way, that's one of the reasons some Arab states are making peace with us. They've begun to figure it out. We ain't going nowhere. We ain't going nowhere. If anything, we could make the whole neighborhood better. We've always said that. We could make the entire Middle East a better place. Politically, economically, socially, health-wise, you name it. I will tell you one thing. When you get those Israeli reservists to speak, you're going to get some of them.
Right.
You're going to get younger versions of me. Because it's not just me. There's a whole bunch, anybody who's gone through what I've gone through, feels the same way, talks the same way. You will see the passion, and that's a whole other generation right now. And we need to light that fire with everyone. I'm not, here I may be one voice. In Israel, there are 100,000s of people like me. That's the good news.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take care, everybody. Thank you, Jack.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.